Whether you think of the Empire's super star destroyers as powerful weapons of war or a series of wasteful vanity projects, one thing is undeniable. They sure did like to build them. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to be classifying star dreadnoughts as any ship over 7 kilometers in length, so sorry about your luck, Praetor class. The Executor class is easily the most famous of the super star destroyer classes thanks to its introduction in Empire Strikes Back, but it also has the most complicated history as a result. While the official length of the ship, for example, was eventually settled at a pretty consistent 19 kilometers, plenty of older sources give varying lengths, with 8 kilometers and 12 kilometers being some of the more common early numbers. This also applies to some discrepancies in the origin story of the Executor itself. The design was made by Lyra Wessex, the woman responsible for the designs of the Venator and Imperial class Star Destroyers, and the first member of the class was codenamed Project Sarlacc, a 12-kilometer prototype variant and a very wide buoy developed between Kuat, Coruscant, and Biss soon after the Clone Wars. This is primarily covered in the Wizards of the Coast tabletop RPG content, with its story cleaned up a bit more in the Essential Guide to Warfare. It was destroyed by smuggler forces aligned with Lady Alia Aldredi. The smugglers were able to fly through the ship at Biss while it was under construction and blow it up. As the production of the Death Star threatened the Imperial Navy's prestige, this failed project, which formerly left naval traditionalists dismayed, spiraled out into more examples of the Executor class. The namesake of the class, Executor itself, began construction at the secret shipyards of Scarl at least 3 years before Yavin, and then it was moved to Fondor to finish construction. It served as the flagship of Darth Vader and his Death Squadron until its destruction at the Battle of Endor. Secretly though, Executor had been built alongside a sister ship, originally given the same designation to hide that it was a different ship, which seems like an ineffective way to do that, but that's just me. While Executor was finished at Fondor, Executor 2, later known as Lusancia, was finished at Kuat and then hidden under the surface of Coruscant and used as a prison. Intelligence Director Isan Isard used the ship to escape during the liberation of Coruscant by the New Republic, after which it was itself captured by the New Republic in the Battle of Typhera. Many in the New Republic military opposed the use of the ship both as a symbol and for its alleged impracticality in battle. However, they eventually changed their minds and returned the ship to active service as their own fleet doctrine began to split between those who advocated for these massive capital ships and those who preferred a more fighter-focused approach. Ultimately, Lusancia was destroyed at the Battle of Borleas in the Yuuzhan Vong War, where it was used as a giant spear to ram a Vong warship, something we're going to be seeing a lot of. 3 more Executor-class ships, Aggressor, Brawl, and Reaper, were built soon after this pair at Kuat. Aggressor was first under the command of Admiral Roke, and after Endor it was called to the defense of Corellia's shipyards against potential New Republic attackers. Soon after, it landed under the command of Grand Admiral Joseph Grunger, who took it back to the Corellian system where it had been defending to try to subjugate the world instead. Aggressor, along with Grand Admiral Grunger and Grand Admiral Pitta, who was in charge of Corellia's defense, were lost in the ensuing Battle of Trellis. The Brawl was given to the also newly minted Admiral Zinj in charge of the Quelli Oversector, and the Admiral renamed it from Brawl to Iron Fist in honor of his prior ship. Following the Emperor's death at Endor, it became the core of Zinj's power base as he formed a new empire himself. This didn't last long, as 8 years after the Battle of Yavin, both Zinj and Iron Fist were destroyed by an alliance between the Hapans and the New Republic, making it one of the very few ships on this list that were actually destroyed in a conventional battle with the New Republic, rather than being sabotaged, boarded, or destroyed in Imperial infighting. Reaper had originally been part of Scourge Squadron in the Outer Rim, leading a task force to hunt rebel cells. After Grand Moff Tarkin's death on the Death Star, he was replaced by Ardus Kane, who was given command of the Reaper and Scourge Squadron. When the Emperor died, Kane used Reaper to consolidate his forces and form the Pentastar alignment. Kane and Reaper sat out most of the early fighting, but did become involved in the Reborn Emperor's campaigns, where Kane died although Reaper survived. It eventually joined the forces of Admiral Natasi Dalla and Gilad Pellaeon as they reunited the Empire, and it even served as Pellaeon's flagship in command of all the Imperial forces for the Orinda campaign against the New Republic, before it was destroyed at the Battle of Selenon 13 years after Yavin. Zinj attempted to get a second Executor class for his empire during the Warlord phase. The Razor's Kiss was one of a few rare members of the class built after Endor at Kuat, and the ship was stolen by Zinj in a raid. Unfortunately for him, it had been sabotaged by Shala Nelprin, a member of the New Republic's Wraith Squadron, blowing its shields and engines and allowing for Han Solo's battle group to finish the ship off. Zinch was able to recover much of the wreckage, using it to build the Second Death, an executor-shaped hulk which he used to trick the New Republic into believing they had actually destroyed Iron Fist, when really they were just blowing up the Razor's Kiss a second time. Jumping back to the Empire's original reign, we know of several other executor classes constructed and lost during this period. Rebel intelligence indicated that at least 20 were built, though we don't have all of them named, and several only end up as quick references. In Rebel Strike, the player destroys an unnamed executor under construction in the Fondor shipyards. In an Empire at War Forces of Corruption story campaign, an executor class called the Annihilator returns to Kuat's shipyards to defend against the concurrent attacks by the Rebel Alliance and the Zan Consortium, where it gets destroyed by the captured Eclipse's super laser. Sticking with video games though, this time for one set after Endor, in Battlefront Elite Squadron, the Force-sensitive clone X-1 has an executor as his flagship, leading his forces over the planet Mustafar following Endor, where it also gets destroyed. Admiral Corrin in the Starfighters Down RPG adventure commands the Executor class Enforcer, which gets ambushed by Luke Skywalker near Bespin. The Empire was able to drive off the attack, but the Enforcer took heavy damage and was destroyed by Rebel Admiral Fenris while it was undergoing repairs at the Phelan Orbital Yards soon after. The bad luck continued for the Empire's Executor classes with the Terror, under the command of Admiral Sarn and assigned to protect the cloaking research being done by the Empire. It was outfit with a cloaking device itself. However, two Rebel agents, Rue Merlin and Rookie 1, infiltrated the ship and blew its reactor in a stolen TIE Phantom, a fighter type also capable of cloaking, destroying the Terror and the attached TIE Phantom production facility in one very costly move. The Intimidator was stationed by the Empire at the Black 15 shipyards over the world of the genocidal Yavitha. Following the Empire's fall, the ship and others in its fleet were captured by revolting Yavithan slaves, and Intimidator was renamed the Pride of Yavitha. The Imperials, who were now enslaved themselves, installed slave circuitry on the ships. When the New Republic arrived to fight the Yavithan fleet, Imperial Major Sil Saranin triggered the slave circuitry to jump Intimidator to hyperspace. It was found 4 years later on the edges of known space, abandoned and nearly destroyed. Very spooky stuff. The Guardian, under the command of Admiral Guyan Drommel, fled from its station near Coruscant upon the news of the Emperor's death. Drommel took it and the rest of his fleet to his homeworld Aplovis and used it to establish his own empire in that sector. Initial conflicts with the New Republic proved costly, and heavily damaged the Guardian, particularly in the Battle of Tantive 5 and 5 ABY, though Drommel managed to repair the ship and hold out for another decade. In 16 ABY, a pair of ship thieves snuck on board, since you apparently never need more than a couple people to ruin one of these things, and they managed to free a bunch of New Republic prisoners held on board before forcing the ship to jump into a New Republic fleet's position. Drommel refused the New Republic's order to surrender, but nobody really liked Drommel and no one really wanted to die, so the ship thieves were able to convince the crew that they'd receive better treatment if they just surrendered. Drommel's second-in-command followed this up by killing him and handing the ship over to the New Republic, where it even served as the flagship of Admiral Akbar for a while. He used the ship in his campaigns against Gilad Pelion, the leader of the reunited Imperial forces, and remained in the New Republic's service throughout the following Yuzon Vong War. Another of the warlords following Endor, Sander Dalvardis of the Ariado Authority, oversaw the construction of a new executor class, the Nighthammer. Night as in not the Dayhammer. This took a massive amount of Dalvardis' resources, and it was believed to be named after his lover, whom he had attacked in the night with the hammer, and who was allegedly kept in a stasis chamber in Dalvardis' flagships. Dalvardis was one of many warlords killed by Admiral Dala during her reunification of the Empire, at which point she took Nighthammer as her own flagship and added a K, turning it into the Nighthammer, and planning to use against the New Republic's Jedi Knights of Luke Skywalker's Jedi Academy on Yavin 4. During the assault, in a pattern you may be starting to notice, Luke's romantic interest in former Jedi Knight Callista Ming took a single TIE bomber, docked it on the ship, and caused a massive amount of internal damage, forcing Dala to abandon the ship as it was drawn into the gas giant and destroyed. The final known and explicitly named executor class is the Whelm, commanded by Admiral Fayette Keyes and left to defend Anaxis after Endor. Before Thrawn's campaign against the New Republic, Whelm became one of many Star Dreadnoughts and other Imperial assets secretly called to Biss by the Reborn Emperor, unbeknownst to Keyes' commanding officer Odsted Wormis, who surrendered the planet to the New Republic soon after and said he had no idea where the Whelm had gone. During the Dark Empire period and the return of Palpatine which followed, Whelm was one of 4 Executor-class ships to emerge from the deep core, spearheading a series of massive fleets. Presumably, the other 3 Executors are different instances from any of the named ones already mentioned on this list. These 3 were possibly destroyed by the New Republic in an actual battle, and not just boarded or destroyed by other Imperials, but the Dark Empire-era dreadnoughts were just as commonly destroyed by each other as by the New Republic, so that's not a guarantee. Whelm itself was destroyed during the infighting against a Mandator 3, the Panthak, which we'll be getting to in a moment. There aren't any official images of designs for the Mandators, so the designs I'm showing here are fanon designs made by Farshot for the Empire at War Expanded mods. There's one final, unnamed supership which is likely an Executor, but it's not entirely clear. The novel Destiny's Way, set during the Yuuzhan Vong War 2 decades after Endor, includes negotiations between Leia and the Imperial Remnant, where the welcoming committee for Leia involves flying past one of the last remaining superships in the Empire's arsenal. It's only described as an 8-kilometer long ship, with little other detail, but this would fit with the intent to have it be an Executor given the discrepancy in given sizes over the years. Sometimes people do classify these different sizes as different classes, with the so-called super class being the 8-kilometer version, which I usually don't bother with, but if that's what you're into, go for it. The next most prominent line of supership designs in the Empire is probably the Mandator line and its offshoots. This line goes back to the late Republic, where the original Mandators made by Kuat Drive Yards were largely just big 8-kilometer long status symbols, allegedly meant for sector defense. There were limitations on hyperdrives for large ships as well as armaments, so the constructed Mandators were largely just a way for rich core worlds to show the rest of the galaxy how rich in core they were. Kuat kept 3 of its own, while the worlds Ixtlar, Alsacon, and Humbarine each had 1. We don't know the names for any of these. As the Clone Wars rolled around and the limitations on armaments were no longer a factor, the Mandator II also came around, more suited for actual warfare. At least 3 of the original Mandator 1s were refit into Mandator 2s, with 3 new construction Mandator 2s being produced as well. It's unknown if there were any significant differences between the new constructions versus the refits, but just like the Mandator 1s, we still don't know the names for any of them. Under the Empire, the Mandator class was taken in 2 new directions. A larger follow-up, the 12-kilometer Mandator 3, and an offshoot design, the 7.2-kilometer Bellator. We've already mentioned one Mandator 3, the Panthak, which was destroyed by the Whelm in the Imperial infighting, and its sister ship, the Aculeus, met a similar fate, getting destroyed by a swarm of TIE droids, which is much less cool than dying to another Superstar Destroyer. While we don't have any actual design details for the Mandators per se, we do know they were likely designed based off of background blobs from the Dark Empire comics, which is what was done with several of the other ships designed by Fractal who did make a lot of the official designs we're talking about today for the Essential Guide to Warfare. That book says 3 other unnamed Mandator 3s were involved in the deep core fleets, bringing us to a total of 34 Imperial Superstar Destroyers so far. If we were to count all the background blobs in Dark Empire individually, we may be able to add a few extra types or instances of existing types in there, but my psyche isn't ready for going down that Rorschach test of a rabbit hole. The smaller Bellator class was built for speed, and it's one of the harder ones to track information for. We don't actually get direct information on specific instances, but the ship does show up a lot in the background of multiple pictures. During the Empire's reign, there's one in a picture of a fleet under review by Admiral Ozzel, and there's also 2 docked at the huge Imperial naval station Valaduja in one of Fractal scenes for the Essential Guide to Warfare. Another render shows a Bellator near a refueling Asserter, and one of the Bellators definitely made it into Dark Empire, where its design originated. These 4 images mean there's at least 2 and up to 5 different Bellators. I'm going to just assume they overlap as much as they logically can, and say we have 2 solid ones here. The Asserter class dreadnought, introduced sometime before the Battle of Hoth, is in a similar position to the Bellator, although with a bit more official information known. It's much bigger than most of the other ships we've covered so far, approaching the Executor's length at 15 kilometers. This time we do have 2 named instances, the Wrath and the eponymous Asserter. Much like with the Bellator, I'm just going to assume the ones we see in those renders, including the Valaduja image, are just the Wrath and the Asserter. The Asserter itself is simply used in the RPG sourcebook Lead by Example and has no real story attached to it, but the Wrath we know takes part in at least a surface bombardment called a Base Delta Zero, which really isn't all that much information either. This design is one of the ones made by Fractal Sponge, which made it into the official Essential Guide to Warfare. Fractal Sponge, which I guess I haven't explained yet is the name of a person, did some original stats for the ship that included a small super laser, although this was left out of the official stats later on. Some of the ships which did include super lasers were the Eclipse and the Sovereign classes. The Eclipse and Sovereign were both capable of using that super laser to crack the mantle of a planet, and they were at least in the planning stages during the Emperor's original reign. Shortly after Endor, the 17.5 kilometer Eclipse was under construction at Kuat, where it's used in the Empire at War Forces of Corruption final mission before being moved to Biss and completing its construction there. Its sister ship, the similar although slightly different Eclipse II, was developed around the same time through a similar process. The first Eclipse was destroyed when Luke and Leia, two New Republic operatives, continued the tale as old as time and indirectly caused the destruction of an Imperial supership by forcing Palpatine to lose control of a massive Force storm during his assault on the New Republic Pinnacle base in the Dasucha system, destroying the ship and himself. Luckily for Palpatine, he just had to hop into a new clone body, and he had the Eclipse II ready to serve as his flagship. Yet again, this ship was boarded over Biss by a small group of New Republic operatives, led by Wedge Antilles and Lando Calrissian, who sent it careening into the Galaxy Gun superweapon, destroying both of them. I'm really starting to think these things might not be worth it. The Sovereigns are once again pretty information sparse, unfortunately. They don't have full designs, only a silhouette, although there are a few fan models fleshing them out, including this fairly old one from Empire at War Expanded. They began construction at the same time as the Eclipse, however, unlike the Eclipse 1 and 2, the first of its class, the Sovereign itself, likely never actually completed construction. There were 3 other members of the class that were at least planned and potentially started construction, but similarly weren't finished. These are the Heresiarch, the Autarch, and the Despot. The Star Wars Encyclopedia claims that Zinj had a Sovereign as well, but this seems like it's almost certainly a mistake. The final defined class we'll be dealing with is the Vengeance class, coming in at 19,000 meters, just like the Executor. The original member of this class is the Vengeance itself, under the command of Captain Sisko, and built as a flagship for the Inquisitor Jarek. It was constructed sometime before Hoth, like most of the other Super Star Destroyers, and it remained in Jarek's service until his death 5 years after Yavin at Ruusan, although I don't believe the fate of the ship itself is known beyond that. At least 3 other members of the class were used in the Dark Empire period, leading the fleets out of the core that we've heard so much about. One other member of the class, which I assume is one of those 3, does have a confirmed name and fate. This was the Javelin, which was destroyed during the Imperial infighting like so many other assets. It was used to ram a torpedo sphere over Chasen and was destroyed in the process, much like the Aggressor was in the Corellian system a few short years earlier. Several other unique superships existed under the Empire and Imperial Remnant. First is the indeterminately massive factory ship, the Arkhammer, used to produce the Dark Trooper droids before its destruction. It has a comic appearance where it looks different than its Dark Forces and Empire at War version, but it's seemingly intended to be the same ship. Kyle Katarn destroys it after the Battle of Yavin, and as far as we know, no attempt was ever made to recreate it, and the Dark Trooper project died with it. The early years of the Empire saw one of the weirdest dreadnoughts the Empire ever constructed, the 19-kilometer Eye of Palpatine, an asteroid-shaped monstrosity which began construction within the first few years after the Clone Wars. I'll give you one guess what happened with it. That's right, 2 Jedi snuck on board, including Callista Ming, who did the same thing to Nighthammer and shut the ship down. It was eventually reactivated in 12 ABY by the Emperor's hand Rogan Ismarin and her son Eirik, after which it tried to complete its original goal of picking up its assigned stormtrooper contingents. Since those were long gone by this point, it just randomly started picking up members of a variety of species, who were then brainwashed into thinking they were stormtroopers. More of the pesky Jedi snuck on board the same ship a second time, this time fully destroying it. The final 2 ships we have to talk about are actually some of the more commonly referenced ships in the Legends Expanded Universe, although they never receive a proper class designation or description beyond an engine count, the Megador and the Dominion. In the Empire at War Expanded mod, we've gone with making them a Bellator and a Mandator 3 respectively, but this is entirely speculation. Both ships were constructed at secret deep core shipyards by the Warlord Group Zero Command before being absorbed by Dalla's reunified empire, having been left in dry dock due to Zero Command's inability to crew them. They became key components of Pellion's final campaigns against the New Republic, which were successful enough that the New Republic was convinced not to just grind the tiny remaining Imperial territory to dust. The two ships continued in active service to the Empire and then the Galactic Alliance throughout the Yuzon Vong War, the Dark Nest Crisis, and the Second Galactic Civil War, although Dominion was destroyed in 41 ABY at the Battle of the Roche asteroid fields. That does it for our list of Imperial Star Dreadnoughts, bringing us to at least 52 fairly solid individual ships among several classes. Technically, you could argue some of the super weapons like the Death Star are really just big versions of this, but I'll probably do a super weapon focused video later on rather than including them here. If there are any other ships I did miss, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.